A small promise can change someone's entire life, but Keanu Reeves had no idea that tonight, one simple promise would mean the world to a homeless girl. As he stepped out of a luxurious restaurant in Los Angeles, Keanu noticed a young girl sitting on the cold sidewalk. People hurried past her, avoiding eye contact as if she didn't exist, but something about her eyes caught Keanu's attention. Eyes that carried a story no one had stopped to hear. What happened next would not only change her fate, but also leave a lasting mark on Keanu himself. Before we dive in, we want to thank you for choosing to watch the story on our channel. Despite a sea of contents out there, we promise this one won't let you down. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Now, let's begin this heartwarming journey. The air inside the small veterinary clinic was thick with tension, the sterile scent of disinfectant mixed with the frantic energy of uncertainty. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, casting a cold glow over the waiting area where an exhausted little girl sat hunched over, clutching a small, unmoving bundle wrapped in an old sweater. At the reception desk, Keanu Reeves was speaking in a measured, urgent tone. "This cat needs surgery now. You can bill me whatever the cost, just help him." The vet, a middle-aged man in a white coat, looked hesitant. He sighed, glancing at the girl, then back at Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, I understand your concern, but we have policies. We can't perform surgery without proof of ownership. It's a liability issue." "You see the condition he's in," Keanu pressed, his voice still calm but edged with frustration. "Does it matter who owns him when he might not survive the night?" The girl tightened her hold on the bundle in her lap. From within the folds of the sweater, a faint, weak meow escaped. The sound was barely audible, but it hit Keanu like a punch to the chest. "Please," the girl finally whispered, her voice raw with desperation. "Toby's all I have." The vet shifted uncomfortably, looking at the child. The hesitation in his eyes was clear. He wasn't heartless, but there were rules. The tension was broken by the sharp jingle of the clinic's front door swinging open. "There she is," a loud, slurred voice cut through the room. Keanu turned just as a heavy-set man staggered in, his unkempt appearance contrasting starkly with the pristine clinic. The girl's entire body flinched, shrinking against the chair as the man's bloodshot eyes locked onto her. His breath reeked of alcohol and his movements were unsteady, yet filled with aggression. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Ha!" The man's voice boomed as he stomped toward her. "I told you not to run off, and now you got some rich guy playing hero. You think you can just run away and everything's gonna be fine?" Keanu took a step forward, instinctively moving between the girl and the man. "You need to calm down." His voice was firm, but controlled. The man scowled, his lip curling into a sneer. "And who the hell are you to tell me what to do? This is my niece. She's coming home with me." The girl's breathing turned ragged, her fingers tightening around Toby's frail body. "No," she murmured. "Please, Don't please me, kid. You think you get to make the rules?" He reached out, grabbing her arm roughly. The girl yelped. In an instant, Keanu's hand shot out, grabbing the man's wrist. The waiting room fell silent. Keanu's voice was low, steady. "Let go of her." The man yanked his arm free and stumbled back a step. His eyes flickered with anger, but also something else. Uncertainty. He wasn't used to being challenged, and certainly not by someone as composed as the man standing in front of him. "She's my responsibility," the uncle spat. "Not yours, so stay out of it." "Really?" Keanu folded his arms. "Because it doesn't look like you're taking much responsibility at all." The uncle's face darkened. "You don't know a damn thing about us." The clinic's receptionist, now visibly shaken, reached for the phone. "Should I call someone?" Before Keanu could answer, the man barked, "Yeah, go ahead, call the damn cops. I'd love to see how this plays out for your celebrity friend here." The girl's expression twisted in panic. "No, don't!" But it was too late. The receptionist had already dialed. Keanu exhaled slowly, keeping his posture relaxed. He could handle the police. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that this man, this supposed guardian, was going to drag the girl back to a place where no one cared if she lived or died. The girl was trembling, her wide eyes darting between Keanu and her uncle. "Please," she whispered again, barely able to form the words. Keanu knelt beside her, lowering his voice. "Do you trust me?" She hesitated, then, slowly, she nodded. "Then, don't worry," Keanu said softly. "I'm not letting him take you." The front door jingled again. This time, 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside. The girl squeezed Toby tighter. Her uncle smirked. Keanu straightened his shoulders. The night was far from over. 6 hours before the police arrived at the veterinary clinic, before Keanu found himself standing between a frightened girl and her enraged uncle, the night had been just another ordinary evening in Los Angeles. The streets pulsed with life. Couples strolled past high-end boutiques, groups of friends laughed outside bars, and sleek black cars lined the curbs, waiting to escort the city's elite to their next destination. Keanu Reeves stepped out of La Riviera, a Michelin-starred restaurant, the warm glow of its chandeliers spilling onto the pavement behind him. The meal had been pleasant, an old friend passing through town, a quiet table in the back, conversations about everything and nothing. But as he adjusted his jacket against the cool breeze, his thoughts drifted elsewhere. That's when he saw her. A girl, thin, small, barely 13, huddled against the side of a building across the street. Her hoodie was too big for her frame, its fabric worn at the sleeves, the knees of her jeans threadbare. A small cardboard sign rested in her lap, the edges curled from use. Even from a distance, Keanu could read the words, "Please, I just need to help him." Pedestrians passed her without so much as a glance. A businessman in a navy suit tightened his grip on his briefcase as he walked by, deliberately avoiding eye contact. A group of young women, arms linked, veered slightly to the left, their conversation never breaking stride. The girl didn't call out. She didn't beg. She simply sat there, her eyes scanning each passing stranger with quiet desperation, hoping someone would stop, yet preparing for no one to. Keanu hesitated. He had been in the city long enough to know how people justified looking the other way. Scams, troublemakers, runaways. Excuses people made to convince themselves not to care. But something about this girl felt different. He crossed the street. As he approached, her shoulders stiffened. She clutched the sign a little tighter, as if bracing herself for rejection. Keanu crouched down to her level, his tone even, calm. "Are you okay?" The girl flinched at his voice, as if startled by someone actually addressing her. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, revealing wide, wary eyes. The words were automatic, rehearsed. Keanu didn't believe her. "Are you waiting for someone?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No." "Do you need help?" Her fingers curled against the sign. The silence stretched long between them before she finally whispered. "I don't know if I should say." Keanu glanced at her sign again. "Who's him?" The girl swallowed hard. "My cat." That caught him off guard. "Your cat?" She nodded. "He's sick. He won't eat. He barely moves." She hesitated, her voice dropping lower. "I think he swallowed something bad." Keanu studied her carefully. The way she sat, her posture tense yet stubbornly still. The way she held her sign like a shield, fingers tight at the corners. She wasn't asking for food. She wasn't asking for money. She was sitting outside one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, trying to save her cat. He exhaled slowly. "Have you eaten?" The girl blinked at the sudden shift in topic. "What?" "Dinner," he repeated. "Have you eaten?" She hesitated, then finally admitted, "No." Keanu stood, gesturing toward a small cafe down the street. "Then let's start with that." She shrank back slightly. "I don't... It's too cold to sit out here all night," he said simply. "You can tell me about your cat over something warm." The girl's eyes darted around, as if looking for some unseen threat. But when no one stopped her, when no one even seemed to care that she was there, she slowly grabbed her backpack and sign. Then, with visible reluctance, she followed him. The cafe was small, a cozy hole-in-the-wall spot tucked between larger buildings. The bell above the door jingled as Keanu held it open for her. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee and baked goods filled the air. A few late-night patrons sat hunched over laptops, lost in their screens. A waitress, Lisa, glanced up from behind the counter, her brow raising slightly as she recognized Keanu. He offered a small nod of acknowledgement before leading the girl to a booth near the back. She slid into the seat hesitantly, her backpack pressed against her side as if she expected someone to take it from her. Keanu handed her a menu. "Order whatever you want." She didn't move to take it. Something small is fine. Keanu gave her a look, but didn't argue. Instead, he waved Lisa over. 2 hot chocolates? 2 grilled cheese sandwiches? The girl stiffened. That's too much. You don't like grilled cheese? No, I do, but I don't want to waste your money. Keanu leaned back slightly. Don't worry about that. She pressed her lips together, but didn't say anything more. A moment of silence passed before he spoke again. What's your name? The girl hesitated, then finally answered, Emily. Nice to meet you, Emily. I'm Keanu. She stared at him, then let out a tiny, almost incredulous laugh. I know. Keanu smiled slightly, but didn't make a big deal of it. He let the silence settle between them until Lisa returned with their drinks and sandwiches. Emily immediately wrapped her hands around the mug, soaking in the warmth. Keanu let her take a few sips before speaking again. Tell me about Toby. Emily hesitated, but something in his voice, something steady, patient, made her feel like she could. He's been with me since I was 9. My parents gave him to me. Keanu noticed the shift in her tone, the careful way she chose her words. They sound like good people. Emily swallowed. They were. Keanu remained silent, waiting. They died. A car accident. Her voice was flat, almost detached. I was waiting for them at school. They said they'd pick me up early, but they never came. The weight of those words settled heavily between them. I'm sorry, Keanu said quietly. Emily took a shaky breath. After that, my uncle took me in, but he never wanted to. Keanu's expression darkened slightly. Frank? Emily nodded. He drinks a lot. Yells a lot. She took another sip of hot chocolate. He was going to get rid of Toby. Keanu frowned. Why? Said it was already hard enough having me in the house. Her voice wavered. So I left. I couldn't let him do it. Keanu exhaled slowly. Emily tightened her grip around the mug. I made a promise to take care of Toby. A promise. Keanu nodded. Then let's keep that promise. Emily looked up, eyes widening slightly. You mean... We'll figure this out, Keanu said. Together. For the first time that night, Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel completely alone. The street lights cast long shadows as Keanu and Emily walked toward where she had hidden Toby. The city was still alive with movement. Cars humming past, people chattering on sidewalks, the faint sound of distant music floating through the air. But in their small corner of the night, it was quiet. Emily hugged her backpack to her chest, her steps hesitant but purposeful. Keanu walked beside her, hands in his pockets, matching her pace. It's not far, Emily murmured, glancing at him. Just down this alley. Keanu nodded, following as she led him past a row of dumpsters and into a narrow space between buildings. She crouched near a pile of blankets, carefully lifting one aside. Beneath it, a small cat lay curled up in a makeshift nest. Toby barely stirred as she reached out to stroke his fur, his once bright eyes now dull. The sight made her throat tighten. Hey, buddy, she whispered. I brought help. Keanu knelt beside her, observing Toby's weak form. He wasn't a vet, but even he could see that the little creature was in bad shape. He's lost weight, Emily murmured, her voice trembling. He won't eat. I think he swallowed something bad. Keanu studied her face, her desperation, the fear she was trying to hold back. She was just a kid, but she was carrying so much. He exhaled, then reached for his phone. We'll take him to a vet, he said simply. There's one open late a few blocks from here. Emily hesitated. But what if they don't help? What if they ask for papers? I don't have money and... Keanu cut her off with a small, reassuring smile. Let me handle that. Emily stared at him, her fingers still tangled in Toby's fur. No one had ever just handled things for her before. She had always been the one figuring everything out, the one making the impossible choices. But now, for the first time, someone was telling her she didn't have to do it alone. Okay, she whispered. Let's go. She gently scooped Toby into her arms, careful not to jostle him. His body was light. Too light. She swallowed hard, biting back the fear creeping into her chest. Keanu stood, offering his hand. Emily hesitated only a second before taking it, letting him pull her to her feet. The walk to the veterinary clinic felt longer than it should have. Emily held Toby close, feeling his faint breaths against her hands. She couldn't lose him. She wouldn't lose him. Keanu walked beside her in silence, every so often glancing down at the frail bundle in her arms. They reached the clinic just before midnight. The glass door reflected their weary faces as Keanu pushed it open. The receptionist, a young woman with blonde hair tied in a ponytail, looked up from her computer. Her expression flickered with brief recognition when she saw Keanu, but her professionalism remained intact. "Good evening," she said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Keanu replied, nodding toward Emily and Toby. "But this little guy needs urgent care." Emily stepped forward, her voice small but determined. "Please, he's really sick." The receptionist's gaze softened, but she glanced at the clock. "I'll call Dr. Harris. One moment." A few minutes later, a middle-aged man in a white coat stepped into the lobby, his glasses resting low on his nose. He eyed the trio, then nodded toward the examination room. "Come in," he said. Emily sat on the edge of her chair as Dr. Harris examined Toby. Keanu stood nearby, arms crossed, watching closely. The room smelled of antiseptic and something faintly metallic. The soft hum of medical equipment filled the air. After a few minutes, Dr. Harris straightened. "He's in rough shape," he said. "I can feel an obstruction in his abdomen. If it's something he swallowed, we'll need to operate." Emily's breath caught. "Can you save him?" Dr. Harris hesitated. "It's possible, but surgery is risky, especially given how weak he is." Keanu could sense what was coming next. "What's the alternative?" Dr. Harris sighed. "Without surgery, he won't make it." Emily squeezed Toby tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Then do the surgery." The doctor exchanged a glance with the receptionist. "There's an issue," he said. "We need proof of ownership before we can proceed, and the procedure itself isn't cheap." Emily's stomach dropped. I don't have papers, but he's mine. He's all I have left." Dr. Harris softened slightly, but his tone remained professional. "I understand, but our policy is firm." Emily turned to Keanu, panic rising in her chest. "They're not going to help him, are they?" Keanu remained calm. "We'll figure it out." He turned back to Dr. Harris. "I'll cover the cost, whatever it is." The doctor hesitated. "That's generous, Mr. Reeves, but even with payment, I still need legal proof that the cat belongs to her." Keanu exhaled sharply. He could feel Emily trembling beside him. "There has to be a way around this," Keanu said, his voice firm. Dr. Harris sighed. "If you can get an animal welfare organization to vouch for ownership, we could proceed, but until then, I can't authorize the surgery." Emily's hands curled into fists. "Please. He's dying." Before anyone could say more, the door to the clinic swung open with force. A deep, slurred voice cut through the room. "Emily, get over here." Emily flinched. Her entire body went rigid. Keanu turned just as a burly man stepped inside. His unkempt beard and disheveled clothing reeked of alcohol. His bloodshot eyes locked onto Emily like a predator spotting prey. Frank Carter, Emily's uncle. Keanu didn't need an introduction to know exactly who he was. The way Emily shrank into herself, the way her breathing hitched, told him everything. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Frank growled, his heavy boots thudding against the floor as he staggered toward them. "Running off in the middle of the night like some stray? You have any idea how much trouble you're in?" Emily squeezed Toby protectively. Frank's gaze shifted to Keanu, narrowing in recognition. "And you?" His voice was laced with venom. "Big shot Hollywood actor playing hero, huh? You have no business sticking your nose in our family." Keanu met his glare without flinching. "She came to me for help." Frank let out a bitter laugh. "Help? She's my problem, not yours." Emily's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps, her fingers clenched around Toby as if letting go would mean losing everything. The tension in the room thickened, a silent battle hanging in the air. Then, before Keanu could respond, Frank sneered. "Let's see what the cops think about this." He pulled out his phone and dialed. Emily's eyes went wide in horror. Keanu exhaled, keeping his posture calm. The situation had just escalated. The police were coming, and this was far from over. The air in the veterinary clinic grew heavy, the tension thick enough to cut. Emily's grip on Toby tightened, her knuckles white as she watched Frank press his phone to his ear. Keanu remained still, his expression unreadable, but his mind was already working through the situation. He knew how this looked, a famous actor standing between a minor and her supposed guardian. The police would arrive soon, and if Frank played his cards right, Emily could be dragged back to a place where no one cared about her or Toby. That couldn't happen. "Yeah, I got a situation here," Frank slurred into the phone. "Some guy's interfering with my niece. I need officers at the vet clinic on 7th and Maple, now." He ended the call with a triumphant sneer, shoving his phone back into his pocket. "Let's see you talk your way out of this one, movie star." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He had learned long ago that silence often spoke louder than words. He simply turned to Lisa, the receptionist, who looked visibly shaken by Frank's aggression. "Is there security footage in this clinic?" he asked, his voice steady. Lisa hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, we have cameras at the entrance and in the waiting room." "I need you to pull that footage," Keanu said. "Now." Lisa hesitated again, glancing at Dr. Harris, who gave a reluctant nod. Frank's cocky smirk faltered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Making sure the police see the whole story," Keanu replied. Frank's face darkened. "You think you can outsmart me just because you're some big Hollywood guy?" He jabbed a finger toward Emily. "She's my responsibility. I don't need some damn cameras to prove that." Emily flinched at his tone, pressing herself further into the chair. Keanu glanced at her briefly before turning back to Frank. "Responsibility?" he said, his voice cool. "Tell me, Frank, when was the last time you actually looked after her?" Frank's jaw tightened. "That's none of your damn business." "Really? Because from where I'm standing it looks like she's been on her own for a long time," Keanu said. Frank let out a sharp laugh. "You don't know a damn thing about us." "I know enough," Keanu countered. "I know she's terrified of you. I know she ran away to protect the only thing she has left, and I know you're more interested in keeping control than actually taking care of her." Frank's face twisted in anger, but before he could respond, Lisa returned with the flash drive in hand. "Here's the footage from the last 30 minutes. Keanu took it and handed it to Dr. Harris. "Load it up." Dr. Harris plugged the flash drive into a computer, and within seconds, the waiting room security feed played on the monitor. Everyone turned toward the screen as the footage began. The silent recording showed Emily sitting anxiously beside Keanu. Then Frank burst through the door, his stance aggressive, his words, though muted, clearly sharp. His movements were erratic, his grip on Emily forceful. At one point, he grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. The footage froze there, Frank's fingers digging into Emily's arm. Lisa gasped. "Oh my God!" Frank's face turned red. "This is bull—" Before he could finish, the sound of sirens outside cut him off. The police had arrived. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room. "We got a report of a disturbance," said the taller officer, his name tag reading Daniels. "Who called this in?" Frank stepped forward, straightening his jacket. "I did. This guy's been interfering with my family. My niece ran off, and instead of bringing her home, he's sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." Officer Daniels turned to Keanu, his expression unreadable. "Sir, is that true?" Keanu didn't flinch. "Not quite," he gestured toward the monitor. "Before you make any assumptions, I suggest you watch the footage." The officers exchanged a glance before stepping closer to the screen. The room fell silent as the video played once more, this time with the sound enabled. Frank's voice filled the space, his words slurred with anger. "You think you get to make the rules?" His recorded self lunged toward Emily, yanking her wrist. Emily's soft whimper echoed through the speakers. "Get up. We're leaving." The footage froze again. Officer Daniels' expression hardened as he turned back to Frank. "Sir, do you have an explanation for this?" Frank's face twisted. "It's discipline? That's my niece? You think I'm gonna let some actor tell me how to raise her?" The second officer, Reed, narrowed his eyes. "We've had reports about you before, Mr. Carter." Frank's confidence wavered for the first time. "That's just a bunch of nosy neighbors." Officer Daniels cut him off. "You have a record of public intoxication, verbal abuse complaints, neglect reports filed with Child Protective Services." He turned to Emily. "Miss, do you feel safe with your uncle?" Emily didn't hesitate. "No." Frank let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, come on. You're gonna take her word over mine?" Officer Reed folded his arms. "That's exactly what we're going to do." Frank's bravado finally cracked. "You can't just take her away from me." Officer Daniels stepped forward. "Legally we can, and we will." He gestured toward Lisa. "Call CPS, let them know we have a situation here." Frank's hands clenched into fists. "You'll regret this," he growled at Keanu. Keanu held his gaze, unshaken. "No, I won't." Frank started to argue, but the officer stepped in, leading him toward the exit. He cursed under his breath, but he didn't resist. The doors swung shut behind them, and the room fell into a heavy silence. Emily sat frozen in her chair, as if unsure if she could breathe. Keanu crouched beside her. "It's over," he said gently. "You're safe." Emily blinked rapidly, as if processing his words. Then, without warning, she threw her arms around him, gripping his jacket tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Keanu didn't say anything, just rested a reassuring hand on her back. Dr. Harris cleared his throat. "Now that the situation is settled, let's focus on Toby." Emily pulled back, wiping at her face, and nodded. Keanu stood, his expression firm. No more delays. Dr. Harris nodded. "We'll prepare for surgery now." Emily looked down at Toby, his small body still weak but breathing. A flicker of hope entered her eyes. For the first time in a long time, the fight wasn't just hers to bear. She wasn't alone anymore. Dr. Harris wasted no time. He turned to Lisa and gave a quick nod, signaling her to prepare the necessary paperwork. The tension in the clinic had shifted. Frank was gone, but the weight of uncertainty still lingered. Emily clutched Toby against her chest, her fingers barely registering the warmth of his tiny body. Keanu remained close by, his steady presence grounding her. "We'll need to do an X-ray first," Dr. Harris explained as he reached for his clipboard. "It'll confirm whether there's an obstruction and where it's located." Emily swallowed hard. "And then? If we find something blocking his digestive tract, we'll have to operate immediately." Keanu stepped forward. "Do whatever it takes." Lisa quickly processed the necessary paperwork, handing a form to Keanu. "We need a signature to authorize the procedure." Keanu didn't hesitate. He signed at the bottom, his handwriting firm, final. Emily watched in silence, her heart pounding. This was really happening. Someone was actually stepping up for her, for Toby. Dr. Harris took Toby gently from Emily's arms, cradling him with practiced care. "We'll keep you updated." Then, with a final nod, he disappeared into the back, leaving them alone in the waiting area. Emily sank into one of the chairs, exhaling shakily. What if it's too late? Keanu took a seat beside her. "It's not." She glanced up at him. "How do you know?" Keanu leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because I've seen what happens when people fight for something that matters. And I know you're not the kind of person who gives up easily." Emily pressed her lips together, processing his words. "Neither am I," Keanu added. She let out a small breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. "That makes two of us." The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Emily found herself fidgeting, tapping her fingers against her knee, bouncing her foot, glancing at the door every few seconds. Keanu remained composed, but even he checked the clock more than once. Finally, the door to the exam room swung open, and Dr. Harris stepped out. His expression was serious, but not grim. "We found the obstruction," he announced. "It's a small piece of plastic lodged in his intestine." Emily's stomach clenched. "So you have to do surgery?" Dr. Harris nodded. "Yes, the good news is, we caught it in time. But Toby is weak. The surgery will be risky." Keanu didn't hesitate. Then we moved forward. Emily's hands balled into fists. "You'll save him, right?" Dr. Harris met her gaze. "We'll do everything we can." Emily bit her lip, then gave a small nod. "Okay." Dr. Harris turned to leave, but Emily suddenly blurted out, "Wait." He paused, looking back at her. "Can I see him? Before you start?" Dr. Harris hesitated, then nodded. "Come with me." Keanu stood, but Emily shook her head. "I'll be okay, just for a second." He hesitated, but then gave a small nod. "I'll be right here." Emily followed Dr. Harris into the back room. The sight of Toby lying motionless on the examination table made her heart twist. Wires were attached to his tiny body, a monitor beeping softly beside him. She reached out, gently stroking his fur. "You're gonna be okay," she whispered. "You have to be." Toby let out a weak, barely audible meow. Emily swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I'll be waiting for you," she murmured. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped back. Dr. Harris gave her a reassuring nod before leading her back to the waiting room. Keanu stood as soon as she walked in. "You good?" Emily nodded. "Yeah." They both sat back down, waiting as the minutes dragged on. Emily turned to Keanu. "Do you think he knows I love him?" Keanu looked at her, his expression soft. "Without a doubt." Silence fell again, but this time it felt lighter. They waited and hoped. The waiting room was silent, except for the faint hum of the overhead lights and the occasional shuffle of Lisa at the reception desk. Emily sat hunched over, hands clasped together, her fingers twisting anxiously. She had never been the type to pray, but in that moment, she found herself wishing, pleading, desperately for something beyond her control. Keanu sat beside her, his presence steady, unwavering. He didn't speak, didn't fill the silence with empty reassurances. He simply waited with her, his patience a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. The door to the surgical room remained closed. The minutes dragged painfully, stretching into what felt like eternity. Emily exhaled sharply. "What if he doesn't make it?" Keanu turned his head slightly, his gaze calm but firm. "Then we'll know we did everything we could." Emily frowned. "That's not enough." "It has to be," Keanu said simply. Emily pressed her lips together, not wanting to accept that answer. She had already lost too much. Her parents, her home, any sense of security. Losing Toby would feel like losing the last piece of them, the last connection to a life that had slipped through her fingers. The door finally opened. Dr. Harris stepped out, pulling off his surgical gloves. His expression was neutral, unreadable. Emily shot to her feet, her stomach twisting in knots. "How is he?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Harris exhaled, then nodded. "The surgery was successful. We removed the obstruction." Emily's knees nearly gave out from the sheer weight of relief. "He's okay?" she pressed. Dr. Harris held up a hand. "He made it through the procedure, but he's not out of danger yet. The next 24 hours will be critical." Emily swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. "Can I see him?" "He's still under anesthesia," Dr. Harris explained, "but you can sit with him while he recovers." Emily glanced at Keanu. He gave her an encouraging nod. "Go ahead. He'll want to hear your voice when he wakes up." She didn't waste another second. Dr. Harris led her into the back room where Toby lay in a small recovery unit, a thin oxygen tube running near his nose, his tiny chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. He looked so fragile, but he was still here. Emily reached through the bars of the enclosure, brushing a gentle finger along his paw. "Hey, buddy," she whispered. "You did it." Toby didn't stir, but she could hear the faintest sound of his breathing. She stayed there for what felt like hours, just watching him, memorizing the steady rhythm of his tiny heartbeat. Keanu remained in the waiting room, sitting back in his chair, arms crossed. It had been a long night, and yet something inside him felt lighter. Maybe it was the knowledge that Toby had made it through, or maybe it was seeing the way Emily had clung to hope despite everything. Lisa approached the counter, clearing her throat. What was it?" Lisa smiled faintly. "The way you stood up for her. Most people wouldn't have gotten involved." Keanu simply shrugged. "Most people should." Lisa hesitated, then nodded. "You know, there's a social worker from CPS coming in the morning to talk to Emily." Keanu's expression didn't change. "I figured." Lisa shifted on her feet. "They'll want to find her a stable place to stay." Keanu didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Good. She deserves that." Lisa studied him. "You care a lot about her, don't you?" Keanu exhaled. "I just don't think she should have to fight this hard to be safe." Lisa gave him a small smile before returning to her desk. Keanu leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly. For the first time all night, he allowed himself to breathe. Tomorrow, Emily's future will begin to take shape. But for tonight, Toby was alive, and that was enough. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden glow through the clinic's windows. The night's tension had faded, replaced by a quiet exhaustion. Emily sat beside Toby's enclosure, her fingers lightly resting against the bars. His breathing was steadier now, his tiny body no longer limp with weakness. He was still tired, still recovering, but he had made it through. Keanu stood near the doorway, watching her. He's a fighter, just like you." Emily turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." Keanu offered a small smile. "You didn't need me. You were willing to do whatever it took to save him. I just made sure you weren't alone." Emily opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, the sound of a car pulling up outside made them both turn. Through the window, a CPS vehicle came to a stop near the entrance. Emily's grip on the chair tightened. "They're here for me, aren't they?" Keanu nodded. "They just want to make sure you're safe." A moment of silence passed. Then, in a quiet voice, Emily asked, "What if they send me somewhere worse?" Keanu crouched down beside her. "They won't, and you're not going to be alone in this. I made a few calls last night." Emily frowned. "Calls?" Before Keanu could respond, the door opened and a woman in a dark blue CPS uniform stepped inside. "Emily?" she asked kindly. "I'm Sarah Jensen. I've been assigned to your case." Emily hesitated before nodding. Sarah crouched to her level. "I know this is scary, but I promise we're going to find you somewhere safe." She glanced at Keanu, then back at Emily. "Mr. Reeves told me everything. You're incredibly brave. I have to admit." Emily's eyes flickered toward Keanu. "You talked to them?" Keanu nodded. "I told them what happened with Frank, and I also told them about your love for animals." Sarah smiled. "We found a foster family who runs a small animal shelter. They'd love to meet you." Emily's breath hitched. "A shelter?" Keanu nodded. "You'll have a chance to take care of animals, just like your mom did." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "Really?" Sarah reached for her hand. "If you're willing, we can take you there today." Emily looked at Keanu, uncertainty flickering in her expression. "Will I ever see you again?" Keanu smiled softly. "You still owe me a rematch at grilled cheese." A small, watery laugh escaped her lips. That was never a contest. Sarah gave them a moment before gently squeezing Emily's shoulder. "It's your choice, sweetheart." Emily turned back to Toby, still resting in his enclosure. "Can he come with me?" Dr. Harris stepped forward. "Toby will need a few more days to recover, but after that, I don't see why not." Emily wiped at her eyes, nodding. "Okay, I'll go." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're going to do great things, Emily." She bit her lip, then suddenly threw her arms around him. "Thank you." Keanu hugged her back. "You don't have to thank me." She pulled away, wiping at her face. "I think I do." Months passed. Keanu had gone back to his usual life. Film sets, charity events, quiet moments in between. But one afternoon, a letter arrived at his home. The handwriting was small, but neat. "Dear Keanu, I hope you're doing well. Toby is fully recovered now, and he's as mischievous as ever. He loves exploring the shelter, and sometimes I catch him watching over the younger kittens like he knows exactly what it's like to need someone. The family I'm staying with is kind. They let me help with the animals, and I've started studying more about veterinary care. Maybe one day I'll be able to do what my mom did. I just wanted to say thank you for believing in me when no one else did. For proving that people like you exist in the world. You may not think you did much, but to me, it meant everything. You once said, 'A little help can go a long way.' You were right. Emily." Keanu folded the letter carefully, a rare warmth settling in his chest. He didn't do things for gratitude, but knowing that Emily was safe, that she had a future, maybe that was enough. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change someone's entire world. If you've made it to this point, thank you. Not just for clicking on this video, but for staying until the end. That means this story resonated with you, maybe even changed the way you see kindness, responsibility, and what it truly means to stand up for someone. Keanu Reeves didn't have to stop that night. He didn't have to get involved, to challenge the system, or to fight for a girl and her cat. But he did. Not because he had to, but because he chose to, and that choice changed everything. In the end, it wasn't about money, fame, or influence. It was about a promise. A small promise to a girl who had lost everything. A promise that to him was simple, but to her meant the world. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person who believes in you to change the course of your life forever. And if this story left you with something to think about, consider doing one small act of kindness today. Help someone, listen to someone, stand up for someone, even when no one else will. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing, but for us, it brings us one step closer to our first 1,000 subscribers. More subscribers mean more stories like this. Stories that remind us that kindness is not just an idea, but an action. Again, thank you for watching, and remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change someone's entire world. See you in the next video.